Weingarten, the president of the AFT, and a public school teacher. One of my first lessons I taught my students was about the social contract, how both individual freedoms and mutual responsibility are essential in our democracy.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Put 'em on the Couch. I'm your host, Jason McCoy. My sidekick, co-host, and better half, Nelson Boyer, has the day off. Thanks for listening, Couch Surfers. Today, we're diving into an urgent crisis facing North Carolina public education. From soaring teacher vacancies and sinking morale to chronic underfunding and stagnant pay, our schools are in a state of emergency. Despite years of rallying at the state capitol and campaigns like Red for Ed, and the alarm bells being rung by organizations such as the NCAE, National North Carolina Association of Educators, meaningful change has remained elusive. But there may be new developments and new help on the way. These new developments may just shift the tides. Dr. Jen Mangrum, a seasoned educator herself with nearly 40 years of classroom experience in both public schools and universities, is stepping into a pivotal role with the AFT, formerly the American Federation of Teachers. Thanks to an appointment by President Randy Weidgardner herself, Jen is leaving her position at UNCG to spearhead a crucial new initiative aimed at directly supporting our educators and helping us take the fight for resources and better pay to the state legislature. Today, join us as we explore these pressing issues and hear from Dr. Mangrum herself about her bold new mission to transform public education in North Carolina. This is more than an update. It's a crucial conversation about the future of our public schools. It is a pleasure and an honor to have Jen Mangrum on the couch today. Thank you for sitting down with us, Jen.
And I thank you back.
I also understand, Jen, that maybe a congratulations is in order.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that it's public. Yeah, I see that ring on your fingers. Your boyfriend is now your fiance, is that right?
That's right. Absolutely.
Awesome.
So a lot of good things going on in my
Yeah,
life.
exactly. Well, why not? Why not?
Yeah, it's time.
So, yeah, how have you been? Looks like you've been traveling a little bit.
Yes, went to Maine. Had
Right.
a great time.
And that was business, pleasure, or both?
Pleasure. It's my one vacation.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a band I really love called Guster.
Yep.
And they have a 3-day on the ocean festival in August. So I went to that and went to the national park, Acadia National Park before.
And you
So I'm
have
back and refreshed.
Yeah, and you have traveled some for the AFT, is that right?
I have, yeah. Their convention was the Sunday after Biden
Announced,
said
yeah.
he was withdrawing. So and Randy, who is the president, had Kamala there on Thursday.
Did she really? Yeah.
That's pretty impressive
Yeah.
that the week she announces or he suggested her that, she came.
Yeah, it is.
But she was really great. Yeah, and I've been to some leadership meetings, really unions new to me. So learning as much as I can about, and I shouldn't say unions are new to me, unions as the kind where you have actually contracts, right?
Yes.
And the ability to negotiate.
Yes. So collective bargaining.
Yes. And
Yeah.
one time they had me go to Fairfax, Virginia, because they are a right to work state starting in 1977. And then in 2021, their House of Commons, I believe they called it, flipped and became Democratic.
Wow.
And so they made a collective bargaining law that schools, as long as the Board of Education or the district and the teachers vote yes, they can collective bargain. So there's 10 to 12 of them. And I was up there helping, like we were calling all the teachers, going to schools, making sure people understood that they had this vote.
Yeah.
It passed 98%.
Sure.
I don't know why it wouldn't. But it's only the first step because they still can't strike. And so if you're sitting at the table bargaining, if you don't have any leverage, right, a little more difficult, but it's the first step. And so it really inspires me about North Carolina.
Yeah.
I mean, Virginia's right there.
Right.
right,
And
right
and
above
we're
us.
and we're just flipping the state house away from possibly this becoming a reality, right?
Exactly.
And I'm assuming that happened in an election cycle or two there in Virginia, right? It wasn't like
In 2021.
yeah, it's not magic.
Right.
When the people get out and exercise their right to vote and to be heard, things can happen. Jen, many of you know as a public school teacher and or professor at UNCG.
That's right. That's right. And I am no longer at UNCG, believe it or not.
Well, I know, which brings me to maybe some of the other reasons people may be acquainted with you. I know I became acquainted with you. You don't know this, but I saw you pulling a wagon in Raleigh during one of our Red for Ed protests. And it looked like you were running for some kind of office. I later learned that day that you were going up against the mighty Phil Berger for his North Carolina Senate seat, a seat I might add that he unfortunately still holds to this day. Later, you would run for superintendent of North Carolina Public Schools, a role I, along with tens of thousands of others who voted for you, no doubt believed and still do believe you are uniquely qualified for. But alas, you came up a little short there as well, Jen. You've always been a supporter of public schools, and it seems to me that you've always tried to do right by those who use public schools. Why do you care so much?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Because, I decided to run against Phil Berger at a time when I felt like teachers just couldn't take any more. And unfortunately, that was, 8 years ago or so? And so I had never been political in any way. And so looking back, I can't believe I did that. But as it was going along, I thought, why do I care so much?
Yeah.
And I started blogging. I needed to do that for a lot of reasons. And I came to think about my father was a Marine, lifelong Marine. He was in 3 wars, including World War II. And when he retired, I was 4, he went and got his GED. Then he went to UNCW and became a 4th grade teacher.
Oh, wow.
At a Title I school, predominantly to children of color. And that was a big influence on me. My mother was a kindergarten teacher and always had been as long as I'd known. And so I had 2 teacher parents, but that's not unusual, right? But what happened to me was I was 14. My parents were sitting in the kitchen getting ready for school. I was probably curling my hair. I'm pretty sure I was, 8th grader.
Yeah.
And my dad is yelling at the top of his lungs for me to come. So I run to the kitchen and my mom's in the middle of a massive heart attack. And I held her. She fell out of the chair, laid there in my lap. My father called the paramedics. They came. He left with them and my mother. And I knew she hadn't made it, but I also was 14 and was hoping she'd get to the doctor and it would be okay. So I'm home alone at this point. Didn't know what to do. And back in the day, we walked to school, right?
Yes.
And so I walked to school. And I knew that I would see Mrs. Travis and Mrs. Warren. And
These were
who
teachers.
both loved my mother dearly. And that they were going to make it okay, right?
Yeah.
And my father came later in the morning and told me my mom hadn't made it. And it was it changed the trajectory of my life forever. My father did not handle it well at all. Looking back now, I think maybe it was the PTSD that he had never really acknowledged before.
Yeah.
And so I ended up raising my dad. And I wouldn't have had the opportunities that I had along the way if it hadn't been for those teachers that stepped in. And I wanted to be that for other teachers, right? I mean, for other students, excuse me. Later, it would become for other teachers.
Sure.
And so that is a real meaningful place where public education and teachers have my heart. When I ran against Berger, I had to raise money, and that's not comfortable. Wasn't really sure how to do that. And I called one of my mother's friends from, years before, decades before. And she said, Jen, we're so proud of you because you could have gone in another direction.
Sure.
When you're 50 something and you think you're just, life is what it was, right? You just go on along. I didn't know anyone even thought that I could have gone in a different direction. So it made perfect sense looking back why I was like, enough for teachers, enough.
Yes.
And, why don't I literally said to my daughters, why don't I run against him? And they're like, what? I go, why don't I run against Phil
Yeah,
Berger?
why not?
Yeah. Looking back, there were probably lots of reasons they could have said, but they supported me. Yeah, mom.
Wow.
So public education, it has always been my life. And I was a teacher like them, I think. I hope for 14 years before I entered, the university.
What an amazing story. What trauma, but also what triumph. I think it speaks to just how far and wide and for how long and deeply public education resonates with most all of us. Teaching's
Exactly.
not just something that we do day to day, like going to the grocery store and checking people out in the line. It's something that really stays with us, isn't it?
It's a heart job,
Yeah.
definitely. And I'm sure we'll talk about it, but we're losing teachers
Yeah.
at great rates. And the ones that stay, a lot of them, it is because of that heart, right?
Well,
Because
yeah.
they can't imagine not being there for their
It's a
students.
calling in which, interestingly enough, for many of us, myself included, that calling can be a virtue, but it can also be a curse, can it?
Yeah.
And yeah, we will talk about that. Speaking of funding, Jen, North Carolina public schools are facing significant challenges in terms of funding, resources, and human resources in particular, like teachers, staff, and others. Teacher retention, as you alluded, is at an all-time low. This college pipeline to public school teacher conduit is at its lowest. Universities are having a very difficult time enrolling people in teacher education programs, and morale has probably not been this poor in the 25 years I've been here in North Carolina. To say that we're in trouble would be an understatement. Now, I wonder if you could elaborate on how we got here and what exactly people like you mean when you say we're in crisis. I'm assuming you don't mean that we have bad teachers or that somehow
No.
our students aren't capable of learning. It's more than that, isn't it?
Yeah. One of the people I met when I was running first against Berger and then for the superintendent's office was Diane Ravitch.
Mm-hmm.
Diane was an assistant deputy secretary of education for Bush, and she was part of the landmark case or policy, No Child Left Behind.
Yes.
And the premise was that if children and teachers did well, they got rewarded. And if they didn't do well, the punishment was staying back in the grade.
Mm-hmm.
And as well as lots and lots of testing.
Yeah.
And Diane, after a few years, said she realized you can't reward or punish your way out of learning, right? That neither one of those is going to lead a child into a really strong, meaningful education.
Yeah, as much as we want it to be, it doesn't work like a meritocracy, does it?
No. And I had used several of her books in my university before I met her. One is I believe it's The Great Life and Death of the American School System,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. Well, her latest book is called Privatization.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I'm saying this is because I have come to understand that all of these things you said, lack of resources, can't retain teachers, can't recruit teachers, right? Can't keep morale high. We got here because there has been an ongoing agenda to privatize schools. DeVos called them government schools.
Yes.
Right. And that was a significant step because she's showing you that to her, it's something less than.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
I saw it's kind of an analogy. I saw John Oliver the other night, and it was about the privatization of hospice and how many things have gone wrong. Because once you privatize, there's a need to make money. And when you're starting to make money, some people don't get what they need or deserve.
That's right.
And so for public schools, I think that has been the agenda for decades
Mm-hmm.
that people like me weren't aware of.
Yeah.
And I would say to people, they're destroying, they, meaning the people with this agenda, are destroying public schools. Nobody wants to see public schools destroyed, they would say. And I go, I think they do. And now I know that they do.
But if
And
you're
I just have to
underfunding
say,
them on purpose, if you're underfunding on purpose and you're doing the very things that are going to drive morale down and dry up the teacher pipeline, and perhaps even make it difficult for students to learn to read, write, and to ultimately make it out of publication and public education, K through 12, and into a university or college. Isn't it nice that you can also conveniently sell the solution to the problem you created?
you said it so much more beautifully than
Well,
I ever could.
I've thought
I
about it
could've-
for a long time, but I don't have any bona fides, so that's why I wanted you on, Jen.
No, that's beautiful. Yes. I used to say, how do you get teachers to jump ship? Well, you don't pay them and you don't give them resources. And they're like, okay, I'm done.
But you blame
And then-
them when things go wrong at the same time, don't you?
Yes, because what you said, because you have the answer,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how are you get parents to leave public schools? Because public schools have always taught the majority of our students.
That's right.
Well, and you do that when their teachers are leaving because they're concerned, they're worried, And then the other reason you leave is because the government promises you this big check that you can take wherever you want.
Yeah, into a
and
private
put your
setting,
child
right?
Into a private setting.
Yeah, that's right.
So when you said, how did we get here? That's how we got here.
That's how we got here. Now, some of my listeners are pretty savvy, Jen, and I'm sure you know a thing or two about this Leandro ruling. Could you talk specifically about what that is and what's supposed to be happening? How did we, number one, get to the Supreme Court of North Carolina, right? And secondly, it's my understanding that the courts have ruled that the legislative body in North Carolina owes public schools several $billion. What's going on here?
Right. So North Carolina is unique in that we are a state that our constitution, our state constitution, guarantees every child the right to a sound and basic education.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where how it got to the Supreme Court. Because I believe it was 5 districts. One was Hope County.
Mm-hmm.
A young man named Rob Leandro was a student, and he was one of the plaintiffs, and it became named after him. Said, look, I'm in Hope County, and the type of education I'm getting, the lack of resources, certain courses aren't offered.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the same opportunities that a student, say, going to Wake County has.
Sure.
And if we're all guaranteed this right, mine is being lost. And so it's been ongoing for decades, but we finally were getting somewhere. And one of the things that Governor Cooper did that was really helpful was he created the Leandro Commission, a bipartisan group of people that he said, if they rule in our favor, what do we have to do so that every child gets a sound basic education? And it came down to really 3 things. The answer's really deep in terms of resources and ideas, but it basically is a great teacher in every classroom, a great principal in every building, and that teachers have the resources they need to offer good instruction.
Which comes down to money, right?
Yeah, and they were detailed. It even came to recruiting, right? You can't recruit all these teachers. I mean, like the teaching fellows was amazing, right? Back when we had that.
Yeah.
Without money.
Yeah.
So the court did rule in our favor. Yes, you have to pay these billions of dollars so that counties like Hope, can have a sound basic education. And it actually, when the commission took the money and spread it out, every district was getting something that they were lacking, that they needed. It has come down to Phil Berger, who I ran against as a defendant, saying that one branch of government, the judicial branch, cannot force the legislative branch
To
to
release
do
that
something.
money, yeah.
And so that's the standstill we're at. I'm really afraid the whole ruling is going to be flipped because now we have a new Supreme Court that
Yes.
actually has Phil Berger Jr.
Yeah.
on it.
Literally.
His son literally is a judge on our Supreme Court.
And I don't think that's something most of my listeners know, Jen.
And he's not recusing himself from this case either. So Leandro was really a chance to have premier public education across the state in a more fair distribution, right? Because a lot of the money that our public schools get is local, and it's based usually on housing taxes, right?
Yes.
And so rural areas get less. Parts of the state, the Northeast doesn't have as much population, gets less money.
Yeah.
And so they have less ability to have, these great schools.
Now, even on a smaller scale, it's my understanding that we're really not even continuing to fund some of these special initiatives either. You mentioned the fellowships, right? The teaching fellowships, right? It seems to me that that's what we have done throughout most of my life on this earth. Republicans, Democrats, progressives, rural,
Yes.
urban representatives came and they represented all of our issues, but they used their own specific approaches, strategies, theories, whatever, philosophies to maybe get those done. Anymore, it seems like one side, perhaps, particularly here in North Carolina with the Republicans, have just kind of checked out. But worse than that, maybe, as you're saying, they are now cutting a check to anyone who wants to use it to apply to private schools. I'm not sure if this statistic is true or if I'm way off base, but Jen, I believe I read not too long ago that either 1 in 10 or 1 in 5 public school children are now moving to private schools. Does that surprise you?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't surprise me. I think it probably is closer to 1 in 10.
Okay.
I want to go back and I won't forget to talk about that 1
that's
in
okay.
10.
Yeah.
But you were talking about how our General Assembly, our legislators used to work together.
Yeah.
One of the blessings for me when I ran for state superintendent was Governor Jim Hunt.
Yeah.
And just the other day, I'm moving, obviously, right? Moving into new home. And I found letters. He sent me all kinds of letters.
Oh, wow.
He to me, he knew that I aligned with him in many ways.
Sure.
And, he wants his legacy because when he was our governor, schools were doing well.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, when I came to Guilford County in 1989, I had a master's degree in 2 years teaching, and there was no jobs. Wow. None. We had a surplus.
Isn't that something?
Right? Isn't that something?
Today, it's what, 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 positions seem to be always open across public schools. Yeah.
Way, probably more than that. But Governor Hunt said to me in his beautiful voice that, that they would argue on the General Assembly floor about the best way to get something done. But then they'd go have dinner together.
Sure.
Or they'd go play racquetball together. That they respected one another. They just knew that they had to argue through some ideas to get to some kind of compromise.
No different than you would do.
That.
Yes, no different than you or I would do with our families, right? We can argue, we can have knockdown, drag out fights, but we're still going to spend Thanksgiving together. We're still going to spend Christmas. We're still going to get together and do what families do.
Yeah. I think this is interesting. So I don't know. We'll see if your listeners are interested. But when I ran against Phil Berger, he drew me out of his district. It was back when they had to redraw the lines.
Yes.
I don't believe his district needed to be redrawn, but it was. And he used to be Guilford County and Rockingham that sat on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived in Northwest Guilford County, had for 20-something years, was an elementary teacher there. I felt good about my run.
Yeah.
He redrew the lines, and it became Rockingham, Stokes, Surrey, and part of all of Caswell and part of Surrey.
Oh, my.
Basically, 4 counties that touch Virginia.
Right.
Very, very Republican.
Very
Made him
weird
very safe.
and very Rorschach almost, isn't it?
Made him safe, right?
Of course.
And I'm the kind of person when I decide I'm going to do something, like I'm going to do it.
Sure.
I was privately, I was going through a divorce. And so I was seeking counseling. We both were. And my counselor said, Jen, if you have to move to run, because I was considering that, it can be a trial separation. And it seemed like the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved. It's not against the law to move to run for office.
Sure.
And in fact, our courts had said it was okay because they had just redrawn all the lines, right? So people had to find their spaces. And I was challenged that I didn't really live there.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I promise you, I lived there. I paid for my car taxes there. I had a driver's license. I got my mail. In fact, the letter that challenged me, I had to sign for, came to my home where I lived, right? I had neighbors who said they saw me take the garbage out, on Monday
Sure.
nights. And I was always there sleeping. I was out traveling, doing first my UNCG work and then, campaigning. So the first hearing I won, that was can she vote? And I only won because it didn't have to be unanimous.
Mm-hmm.
The second hearing was someone from each of those counties and one extra person. And the first gentleman, Buster, after I had testified all day. And so my ex-husband testified, we're going, through this. And so we're separating and moving anyway. And my neighbors testified. Buster said, I think she's going to get back with her husband. I say she doesn't live here.
Wow.
The next woman, her name was Tony, and she said, you know what? Miss Mangrum said she didn't take all of her belongings and her clothes. Women take all their clothes when they move. I don't believe she lives here. The next two were Democrats, and they're like, okay, she's got a license, she's got a lease, she paid taxes, like the evidence says she lives there. I see you haven't brought anything forward that said she doesn't. And then the last woman said, and I don't remember her name, but she said, she left her child. Mamas don't leave their children. I don't believe she lives here because my 18-year-old daughter was a senior in high school. And so we let her and my ex-husband stay and let her finish. This was, March or April. And of course, my daughter was upset, but I lost. And the next morning I woke up and it said, Berger's, opponent is disqualified from the race.
Shameless.
Yeah. And I had a really great lawyer as well. He said, we'll appeal to the state. Don't worry. And he goes, because Jen, at the state level, they look at the evidence and this is cut and dry. Went to the state level. And at that time on the Board of Elections were 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 1 independent. Everyone voted party line.
Wow.
4 and 4. And so it was left up to this one independent who said, yes, she obviously lives there. But my point is, we shouldn't be so partisan that we are making judgments, and we meaning our leaders, based on their party.
Yeah.
And they feel like if they go against their party, there's retaliation, there's retribution, they won't succeed. They'll lose their seat, etc.
And facts and rules be damned.
Exactly. Right? Don't matter.
Yeah.
So I share that story. One, it was interesting. The whole Berger campaign could be a Netflix series, honestly, if I wrote it.
Well, I'm sure someone's willing to write it if you're willing to share your perspective. And I'm sure you've got lots of other stories to share about that.
But my lawyer, who was so great, he was a retired elections lawyer. He'd gone to Harvard. And his words were, our system is broken.
Absolutely.
And he actually ended up writing an article for the News and Observer, and I think that's what it was called. Our system is still broken.
Yeah.
I mean, that was 2000, between 16 and 18. And now it's 24.
And it's even worse.
And we need to come to a place where the letter that follows a person's name doesn't define them and doesn't rule how they think. Another interesting thing was I was on this little TV show in Reedsville, and it had a little fake city behind us, and people could call in like this and ask me. Clearly, I just talk.
Yeah, that's okay.
And I mentioned both my parents were Republicans, lifelong Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
And I am pro-life. Excuse me, I am pro-choice.
Sure.
Got that confused. And so someone called up and said, well, your parents were Republican. I said, yeah. Were they pro-choice? And I said, yeah, they were actually. And they go, how can that be?
Wow.
And I started thinking that we've come to think that if you're an R, you have to believe all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a D, you have to believe all these things.
Or else you're not really one of those.
Exactly.
Isn't that shame?
And if we are really thinkers, and that's what our great schools are trying to create as critical thinkers, you may agree with 75% of the party you're in and say, okay, that's good enough, right? That's me. Or you might say neither one's for me. I'm going to be unaffiliated.
Right.
That's great too. But back in my parents' time, they didn't feel the need to hold every belief. You know, it was almost like, what's most important to you?
Mm-hmm.
And my dad was a Marine, and defense was important. And at that time, that's who he felt had his back. But that didn't mean he couldn't see the other side in many other issues. And so when we get back to these public schools, and you said 1 out of 10 are going private, they're not going to the private schools you and I know. Because first of all, the amount of money won't get you in.
Right.
Right. They're I don't know where they give them 8,000 about. And so what's happening are schools are popping up in fellowship halls, in homes,
Old strip malls.
Yeah.
Old churches.
And talk about critical thinking. There's a curriculum that some of these schools are using called ABECA. And ABECA, when you look through it, is very theological based. And I'm a Christian, put that out there. But it says dinosaurs and people lived together, you know, harmoniously for a while. And we know that's not true. We know that's not fact.
Yeah.
So these private schools, they're taking public school money literally out of the hands of the public schools. They're taking it to these small private schools that are popping up. The majority of them are non-denominational Christian based. And they're using curriculum that's not, to me, is unethical to our children.
Let alone unscientific.
Because it's not scientific. And I have nothing against private schools at all. But my public dollars and taking money from the schools my children attend to not be held accountable for factual curriculum, right? They're also, private schools have absolutely no accountability.
Sure. Can you talk about that a little? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So they can spend their money any way they want. Teachers don't have to have any accreditation license. Many of them do, right? If you know a strong private school, they probably have certified teachers. But
they don't have to be credentialed in the same way that K through 12 public schools do.
No, they don't have to. They don't have to even have college degrees or any expertise in the area. They don't have to test them if they don't want to. When our students are being, tested to death, they get the money, and then we're out of it. What you do is what you do. And so I believe in some ways they're harming our future society. This is really about, do you believe in public schools for you and your child, or do you believe in public schools for the greater good? I think our public schools are for everyone's children. And so I need to be concerned about children that aren't getting critical thinking skills.
Right. Well, Jen, that's a lot. And I have to ask, as we start the second half of the show, what can I do about any of this if I am just a parent of a child in North Carolina, or I'm a neighbor of someone who has children in North Carolina, or if I'm a teacher, staff member in one of these schools? What can I do? I mean, I look at the newspaper, or I listen to the nightly news, local news especially. I look at Facebook, and I see all of these charts that say teachers are making less than they were making 5, 10, 15 years ago. looked at something Stu Egan posted a couple of nights ago. I think he's posted 4 or 5 different visualizations that all seem to suggest the same thing. If my wife, who is a 25-year public school employee, were being paid on the same scale she was paid on when she first came in 25 years ago, she'd be earning $90,000 to $100,000. That's with nothing except that original scale that she was promised these incremental raises on. Today, if she's making $65,000, she's doing terrific. What can any of us do?
Yeah. Elections matter. They really, really matter. And I remember as a young teacher saying, I'm just going to close my door and teach my children.
Keep your head down, right?
Keep your head down. And I was at dinner a couple of nights ago. And, I tend to talk about politics. And I said, well, have you seen both candidates that are running for state superintendent of public instruction? I said, one is Mo Green, who I support wholeheartedly, more than wholeheart, like all my hearts. I said, the other is a woman who homeschools her children. None of them go to public school. She hasn't been a public school teacher or have any public school, experience in a professional way. She was at the insurrection wearing the hat, and she said some very horrible things, whether it was sarcastic or not. I think that's her latest thing was, it doesn't matter. They were horrible. And she could win because there's a letter behind her name that we've been voting for. And she said, I have not heard about this. Yeah. What are we going to do if, and I felt that way when I ran for state superintendent. How do you get the message across to however many, I think we have, I don't know, million registered voters, 3 million, I don't even know.
And about 75 days before the election.
It's 5 million, I remember, because I had about 2.5 million votes.
Right.
That's pretty good,
yes,
but I
wonderful.
was still short. How do we get a message to them, right? Because one, we have these kind of public school elections that are so important. Some of them at the same time we're doing governor and president, and they kind of get pushed aside and washed away. There's no media time. Our newspapers are drying up that way, so people don't have it on their porch. That's why things like this podcast are so important, because someone can put it in while they're on a drive and hear it and hear you and I don't have an agenda other than I want our kids to have great schools.
Right. We just want what's best.
That is it.
Yeah.
And Stu Egan said, how can we put children first if we don't put if we put our teachers last?
100%. Yeah. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And so I know people get fed up and they'll say, but they're all bad. They're not. I was not bad.
At least not equally bad, right?
I wasn't bad at all.
Well, I was going to say, sometimes I go outside without combing my hair bad, or sometimes, I chew with my mouth open. But I don't encourage political violence or stand at an insurrection with the gallows nearby and yell death to our vice president. Yeah. There's two different types of bad, I think.
So I do some of those bad.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have got to help, and it starts with the kids.
Yeah.
There's a group called Pastors for North Carolina Children.
Okay.
And they're bipartisan, nonpartisan, whichever one you want to say. And they came to my class at UNCG with teachers and said, do you know who your senator is and your representative? And they didn't.
Yeah.
And then they said, do you know what words to listen for? Right? A lot of people don't know what a voucher is.
Right.
Which is that money that goes to private school.
Or that all private schools are not created equally.
Yeah, and they don't know these things.
Yeah, the little school down the street that's in an old strip mall is not the same as Harvard University. They're both private schools, technically, but they're not. They don't have the same reputation, and they don't have the same sort of ethos and the same philosophy, do they?
Standards. And I forgot what I was going to say, because that was such a good
Yeah.
example, what you said. But yeah, they're not all equal.
Yeah, you were just saying
But,
that the pastors came in, this
oh,
group
yeah,
would
thank
come
you.
in and talk about what these words mean, and many kids didn't know, or many people didn't know what the word voucher meant. Yeah.
So then they said, go to this site and you will put in your address
Mm-hmm.
and you'll find out who represents you. And then read some of their websites.
Sure.
These students said, my mind's blown,
Wow.
because they had never taken the time to really know something. And again, they're not all great and they're not all
Yeah.
bad, but
But you got to
if you
look.
don't, you gotta look.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this woman wants to run our public schools.
Right. And not knowing what you don't know is not an excuse anymore, right? It's not okay to put your head in the sand, because whether you have kids in public education or not, it's going to affect you one way or the other. It's
That's
going to
that common
affect
good.
you when businesses no longer locate here in our state, because what do business leaders care about the most? Well, they tell us they care about public education. Are there good schools that are well funded? Do they have good teachers for their families to attend? I mean, no CEO worth his or her salt is going to come to North Carolina if our schools are terrible.
And, people, not only are teachers leaving, people are not choosing to be teachers
To begin with.
And this was back when I was running, but there was a Pew poll that 50% or more of parents did not want their child to be a teacher. And that has never happened in the history.
No,
People were always proud.
You and I
happy.
remember, right, when we went around the classroom in elementary school and our teacher said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Many of the kids said, "I want to be a teacher," because that was something that was respected. That was something we looked up to. And honestly, people didn't need to work 3 and 4 jobs. They didn't have to hustle as much, right? If your teacher taught for 6 to 8 hours a day, that was a full-time job. That's what he or she did.
Yeah.
Anymore, even if you love it, if it's your calling, if you bleed and sweat, you still have to pay your mortgage. You still have to pay your utility bill. You still have to, unfortunately, pay for things for your classroom. And so the only way to do that anymore here in North Carolina, it seems more and more, is to get a side hustle, to tutor also, to deliver DoorDash. And that's just a real shame.
We have teachers with multiple children, right? Say 3 children. Their husband they're divorced or deceased or whatever, whose kids are on free and reduced lunch.
Right. Isn't
Right.
that something?
My dad said to me a long time when I was thinking about teaching, it's a good job for a wife.
How about
He was
that?
very traditional, right? And he thought, you're supplementing the income. It's a great job. Well, now, for the past 10 years, it's just been me paying for me. And I hate to break it. Oh, you know this too. Universities don't pay great either.
Not a whole lot, yeah. And
No,
I'll say
there's teachers making more than me.
It's worse. It's worse than that now. I mean, my wife's a 25-year public school employee, and sometimes she costs us money at the end of the month, right? Because I've had to put the kids in daycare more than I thought I would. I've had to do X or Y. She went to Jamaica for a teacher education program, and somehow we had to pay the plane ticket and buy gifts and all kinds of other things. It ended up costing us more than she would have earned just going to work. But again, it is a calling for many people, and she's selfless, as most educators are across this country. Jen, I'd be remiss if I didn't give you time to talk about this new thing you're working on, this project or this organization that you're now a member of, and you're trying to get others to maybe think about becoming a member of. It's what I assume finally encouraged you to retire from your professorship at UNCG, right?
Yeah.
This organization, if you could talk to our listeners about it, because when we talk about things we can do, clearly we can do some of those things you mentioned. We can find out what's out there. We can read where people stand. Talk about your organization and how maybe you and or your organization can help people as well.
Yeah. So I really believe I have thousands of teachers that follow me on social media, and I believe they were supporting my candidacy. And when I lost, I was still getting messages. This is happening. What can I do about it? What can we do about this? And being snarky in my head, I want to say, call the current superintendent,
Yeah.
right? But I didn't. I always say, I'm going to look into it. See,
Or join one of these organizations that NCAE was a big one at one time. I think they still are. Yeah.
yeah. No, but I mean, I would try to solve their problems
Oh,
for
my.
them, right? Because I had this sense of responsibility. I lost and I felt like I let these people down. And then I actually was told by Linda Darling Hammond, who was the head of Biden's transition team for education, that my name had been submitted by Diane Ravitch, who
Oh,
I told
wow.
you about earlier, and Erskine Bowles, and that they were going to recommend me for a position with Biden.
Oh, wow.
So when I got that email, I was like, woo, yay. I thought
I can really help
going
some
to-
people now.
I'm going, yeah. It didn't happen, but also the longer it didn't happen, I started doing that thing like be grateful for unanswered prayers, because I started realizing that while I would get a lot of political knowledge, I wouldn't be impacting locally like I wanted to, right? So I told Diane, I said, okay, I don't think this is going to happen. And I said, but I don't know how to help teachers with, this, with the network I've created, because honestly, I've met so many amazing, influential people by running against, Berger, and then being the state candidate. So Diane said, I want you to meet my friend Randy Weingarten.
The head of the AFT.
AFT. And this woman, these were her words. I'm 5'2", former school teacher, lesbian, married to a rabbi, and I'm a fighter. I'm everything they hate. And when she was talking about people who hate unions, right? And it ends up that Mike Pompeo, and this is in the New York Times, you can Google it, said she was the most dangerous person in the world.
Oh, my.
Over dictators, etc. And I'm like, this is someone I need to know more about. So anyway, she does run the American Federation of Teachers, and they no longer go by that name. They go by AFT because they also support healthcare workers, nurses. They also support public employees, like those that work for government or police.
That would have been my next question, right? Can you get involved with something like the AFT without being a K through 12 public school teacher?
Yes, it's also for paraprofessionals, people that work in the building. It's for pre-K teachers, but it's also what I'm doing right now is just trying to lay the groundwork for AFT in North Carolina. So yes, I left UNCG and I'm working on this. They also do higher ed. So we had some fights going on at the university level too with our new board of governors that we're dealing with. So AFT was involved in that as well. But what I love about Randy is she says our job is for people and communities to thrive. And she's just as much about the community as she is about the worker. Yes, we need better salaries, better working conditions. But a lot of the things we do at AFT are geared to the community. For instance, in Wilmington, I arranged it through AFT, donated 300 books that went into 150 book bags, brand new book bags for kids to take on the first day of school.
Wonderful.
AFT has a partnership with a group called First Book. So I was able to give that. I've
Move over, Dolly Parton.
Yeah, last year I gave over 10,000.
Oh, my.
Because I knew they had this partnership, and so I'm using that. They also are really big in literacy, which there is a divide between people on how you teach kids to read. And so they have all these free lesson plans and professional development, et cetera, for parents and for teachers. They have a clinic that they would come if one of your listeners wanted to help immigrants become citizens, because it's not an easy process.
Right.
They come and they help you do that. They help teachers, because public teachers and public employees can get loan forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And they've averaged on teachers getting 61,000 for each person forgiven.
Oh my goodness.
And that changes your life when you don't owe 61,000
Right.
anymore. Now, there are rules. They have to have taught a number of years, right? They have to make a certain number of payments themselves.
But you're saying the AFT and or representatives of the AFT might be able to help some people within earshot of this podcast today get some loan forgiveness, provided that they hit certain benchmarks and meet certain requirements. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they do the heavy lifting for you. So I was saying this because AFT has what in North Carolina we're calling associate members. Mm-hmm. All of our members are associate. We don't have a local yet. You probably hear union people say, I'm local 592, right? Or whatever. We don't have one of those yet because we don't have enough members in density in places.
Well, I was going to ask, is it because it's illegal, Jen? Not to interrupt you, but a lot of my listeners and a lot of my friends and family believe that you can't speak, you can't utter, you can't even think about in public things like unions, collective bargaining, negotiating, because, quote, it's illegal. This is a right to work state, and they claim that all speak regarding collective action, bargaining, union is illegal. Can you set the record straight once and for all about that?
I just love you so much. You ask such great questions.
Thank you.
We have a federal right. There's a law to protect anybody from joining a union and helping to organize a union. Everyone has that right.
Say that one more time now for the people in the back, the people who are hard of hearing. In North Carolina, you're saying.
North Carolina's a right to work, which simply means public employees can't strike or can't collective bargain.
Okay.
And that's a part of that bigger agenda, just like privatization, right? Because if we help people or if we convince people the narrative is unions are illegal, then they won't form unions.
They won't form unions, yeah.
And then workers aren't going to rise up and want more money, better benefits. We can keep them down.
And joining a union, organizing, getting together like this, right, is what you said earlier in our conversation, a first step.
It's a first step. And for me, I thought, how do I help teachers? Well, I think the best thing to do is to empower them because no one's going to save them from the political side, apparently, at least in the moment. So we have to empower ourselves.
Right.
We have to have a louder voice. We have to be able to take action. And at the same time, we're getting to do things to help our community. Right?
Sure.
So I also tell people join. It's $5 a month for associate membership. Join and do it for a teacher because they believe what you believe. It's illegal. I'll get in trouble. And I can't promise that they won't get in trouble because management likes to make you feel
like you're in trouble.
You're not allowed to.
Yeah.
But we will do all we can to back them up, right? Because you can, it's illegal to keep someone from joining a union.
And again, you're saying you do not have to be a school teacher in order to join the AFT. The AFT will give membership right now as an associate to anyone who's got $5 a month to join. Is that right?
Yeah, and wants to support teachers, right? And nurses and public employees.
Now, what do these $5 go to, Jen? Tell us what you'll get from this.
It's your union dues, right? If you mean me.
No. I mean, what would I get if I joined today? What would anybody in my audience get if they joined today?
Everything I just told you about. You want a grant to get books to give to a local school. You want to have one of those clinics because you know friends that want to become citizens. You want access to professional development, or you're a parent and you're like, I want to learn how to help my child read. There's all kinds of materials on there. We believe in community schools, and community schools are the schools that have, we believe the school's the hub of the community. And so they offer wraparound services depending on what you need.
Right.
But if a school kids have really bad, dental, we're looking like, we have problems with our mouths and dentistry. So they might have a dental clinic and arrange that. We believe in community schools. So it could be someone who's like, I want to know more about community schools. It could be someone who wants to put the bumper sticker on their car because they want teachers to know
They support them.
we're your friends, right?
Yes.
And it's also a place where, I keep contact in Rockingham County, where Berger's from.
Mm-hmm.
The school board wanted to do a CRT policy, that critical race theory policy. And they had 10 bullets. The last bullet was, you cannot teach that one group oppressed another because of religion or gender or race. Well, how do you teach the Holocaust?
Right.
If you can't teach that? So one of our members said, this isn't right. And so we got together, all the members that were there, parents, the NAACP. We ended up showing a great film and having a discussion. And the producer of the film, he actually, CJ Hunt, used to be on The Daily Show. He's awesome. He answered questions. And that policy got let go. And there were 100 people. I'm not saying it was directly because of that, but we took action and we felt better because this film was teaching like what truth is, right? And what we do know about oppression of people. So I think if you're a member, you can do so many different things or do nothing, but know that you're representing a teacher who may be afraid right now to join. But the more members we have, the more members.
Right, because we are stronger together. And each person, I would imagine, represents just one more ally in this rung that represents this hub, this community you're talking about, Jen. Jen, this has been a wonderful conversation. I could talk to you for hours. I know you're a very busy person, especially now planning a wedding, ladies and gentlemen, as well as this new role as a representative for the AFT. I'm excited to see where this is going to go. I'm really happy you spent time with us today. And one last thing, if people want to get involved, whether they want to join the AFT today or they just want to learn a little bit more about the AFT or they want to learn a little bit more about Jen Mangrum or they want to contact you, give us some websites, give us some names, anything that our listeners right now listening to us as we're driving to work or back from work, maybe they can use to try to reach out and learn more.
That's awesome because one group I didn't mention are retirees. And if retirees come from the North where there are unions and they come to North Carolina because our weather, our economy,
our community.
And so the Nationals telling me, they're saying, hey, why don't we have AFT down here? And they're like, you do, right? Here's who you contact.
Okay.
So if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, if you're a retiree, if you're just someone who's interested in knowing more about unions, definitely contact me, Jen Mangrum. My email is aft.jennifer@gmail.com. I will help you immediately. We need you as much as I think people need the union. And also the union's not a third party. It's not someone coming in to save us.
It is
it's
us. Yeah.
It's us.
That's a good point. I think.
And so I would love their help.
Yeah.
And yes, I'm getting married. I don't know if there'll be a big wedding or not, but you need to come visit me because now I live on a sheep farm.
Love it. I've got sheep dogs.
Yes,
so I can bring them and they can herd.
Yes.
They can do work.
Do you really?
I do.
Really?
I do. They're outside right now. Yes, I do.
Yeah, and that's what we do. We herd sheep with the border collies.
Wonderful.
So,
yeah, I don't know how. Mine are pretty young. They're a little bit, they're undisciplined. Okay, but my assumption is that when they see the sheep, right, it's going to trigger all of these deep evolutionary mechanisms, and they're going to just fall right in line and do the work that they're supposed to do.
Yeah. So there's a metaphor there before we hang up. Don't be a sheep. Don't go with the flock.
Right.
Let's all think for ourselves and learn as much as we can about education and how a union is going to support workers, which are all of us in public schools.
Jen Mangrum, a product, a friend, an advocate for public education. It's been a real pleasure having you today. And I hope we do this again after the election. We'll have even more fun talking about public education.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
This has been great.
Thanks.